Okay, today I want to talk about writing complex storylines and characters with depth. And these questions come to me from time to time from people who also want to start writing their own stories. And a lot of their concerns are, how do you write an original story in this day and age where there's millions of stories out there? Or how do you make sure that your character is not one-dimensional? Or how do you make sure that your story is complex and interesting? And I think after thinking about it, I believe people ask this question because they assume that in order for there to be a complex result, so a complex character or a story, that the process and the starting point to get there must be complex in order for that to happen, or whatever thinking that goes into it must be genius level of a mathematician figuring out a new equation to solve something where it's just one-liner, x equals to whatever, and then nobody else has thought of that before. How do you do that? I think that is not really the right way to do it, because you're solving a story at that point. What you're doing is trying to logic your way to solve this problem. And I don't know about everyone, but I think the stories that reach most people's hearts are the stories that are not about logic or structure, but about the characters and the place that the story takes place in. It's about how well you can make the reader relate to whatever that you're writing, or whoever that you're writing about, regardless of their circumstances and experiences. And that's not something you can decide. That's not something you can say, okay, my character has this tragic story, the readers are gonna feel really sorry for him, he's going to do this and that to the villains, and everybody would agree that what he does is correct. In fact, when you think like that, when you sort of architecturally plan your story out like that, unless you spend a lot of time trying to make it more natural by deviating from your original very simple game plan, you are going to write a pretty generic story no matter how hard you try to make it unpredictable or novel. And at the very end, it's still not really going to be what makes your story stand out to readers, because the goal of said story would become the goal for the reader for this story would just become, oh, I get it, because the point of understanding logic is to understand it, it's to get it, rather than, oh man, I feel for it, or I believe it, or I really get us and understand all the ramifications and I care about it. And one thing that I think we can agree on is that you can't calculate a way to make people react exactly the way that you want, let alone make everyone react this way that you want. All well-written stories would have a lot of people, well, even like not so well-written stories would have a lot of readers seeing the story from different angles or empathizing with different people based on their own backgrounds. And another problem with solving writing in a logical way is that in deducing a solution, there's only one path. Wherever you end up with, there may be 5, 10, 5,000 different possibilities, but once you choose one to go with as your storyline, you only go this way. And that inevitably make this path very straightforward and one-dimensional. Not to mention, now you have to find out all the possibilities that could have branched off from this one starting point that you chose, and think of all the character motivated reasons why the character did not choose to go any of these other ways. which is also very inefficient because it's like instead of the character choosing, saying that I chose to do this because I believe XYZ, they are having to explain, oh, I didn't do all of these because I didn't believe or I didn't think of XYZ. But that's a totally different topic on its own. No matter how genius you make this solution to be, you create basically the problem that you set out to solve. You create a flat, no depth kind of story and character. So I think a good way to think about this is to look at life, because life is literally time building a story for everyone. And if we look back in our lives, no matter how boring it is, we realize that all of our lives are incredibly complex, because if you try to explain yourself in 1 or 2 sentences to some other dude, they're probably not going to understand you as a person very well, unless you give them more examples, tell them more stories. But at the same time, most of us can't really say that our lives are that well planned or have a lot of extremely complex, high-level, high IQ things happening to it that made it this way. What made it this way is the layering of events, experiences, people that we've met, and how those things interconnect with each other, work with or against each other, that gives us our strengths and flaws, that gives us our perspectives. And in this aspect, we are all very complex people, but it's not because all of our lives are very interesting and complex. In fact, most things that happen to us are very simple, but it's not about the complexity of these layers. It's about the layers themselves, the sheer quantity of it, the sheer length of time we have lived, and how all of these things either work with each other, like positive reinforcement, making you a more well-spoken or outspoken or active, proactive person, or work against each other, where, say, you live in a household that has one ideology and it clashes with your social circles outside of your home with a different ideology, and you don't know how to work them together, and makes you a very confused person. In the story and in characters, this kind of layering and their interactions and how they all contribute to make a story what it is, or to make a person who they are. It is this kind of content that makes people really think hard about your story, think and rethink about the people and the events and the circumstances you have presented them, and really consider, what do I think about this issue? Do I agree with the things that this person has had to do or say? Do I agree with it despite understanding their struggles and how their hands are tied and they had no choice, but they do have a choice in choosing whether they succumb or overcome this obstacle? It makes the choices and the thinking difficult for the readers, and that's what gives story and characters complexity. So let's again make the comparison between writing a story and characters versus time writing the story of our lives. In the case of our lives, each of these layers that happen, that make up our complex character, is actually quite simple. It's something that you could probably summarize like, my mom was really terrible to me, or winning that competition really made me realize my own self-worth, or moving to a different country really opened my eyes to how big the world is. They're really simple concepts in life, and they should be really simple concepts in your story writing too. The individual layers of their personality or the story dynamics, they're actually quite simple. You can describe them pretty easily. It's why not many people are confused by them, or it's the reason why they're really accessible to most readers or viewers. Stories like that are generally not the same stories as the ones that make people go, oh my god, it's so complex, I don't know what's going on, what's happening. And yet they manage to come off as being complex and full of depth. So what is actually missing? What is actually hard in writing complex stories and characters is that time. We lived for decades of our lives for it to get this way. Most people, when they write stories or want to come up with a new character, they do it in the span of a few hours. Like, oh, what if I had this great idea for a story, or I thought of this really cool new character, and then they think, it's not interesting enough. Why? Because they've had like a few hours to live. Of course, you're not going to make a character interesting just by thinking of, say, 2 or 3 things at most that happen in their lives. Even if you manage to make them interesting, even if you thought of the most novel idea, you cannot make them multifaceted, and you cannot make them not one-dimensional, because you've only seen them through this single perspective of the past hour, or maybe even days or weeks or months of work instead of years. The key to writing a deep, complex, full of depth kind of story and character is not genius. It's time. It's the amount of time you've made your characters and your story experience, and through that time you add more and more to their story in the form of thinking of things that have happened in the span of the story or in the span of the characters' lives. Imagine coming up with a character. Compare doing this with meeting a new person or making a new friend or getting to know someone that you're starting to date. Imagine how long you've spent with that person to get to some level below the surface of who they are, and then how many years later you only start to dig out some of the deepest, darkest dirt underneath their surface. That kind of time is what allows there to be depth to your characters. Spending that kind of time, instead of digging into somebody's lives in real life, you sort of add layers to your character. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. You start with a character and you build a story around them, or you start with a story and then you put characters where you need them. The important thing is you put these people through events. You put these people through other people. It's how they interact with the world around them and the choices that they make that makes them who they are, and it's the choices that they have made in the past and how they feel about it, how they atone it, how they keep it up, that makes them who they are. And it's through these layers of building, all these millions of connections that you've now made between the character and the world around them and the people around them, that when finally your story starts or something big happens and the character makes this one decision, it affects everything that that person knows. It has big impact on all the people that are connected with them, whether it's beneficial or devastating to all those people and all the world around them. It's what gives this one simple choice, seemingly simple choice, the weight, the depth, and the meaning that it needs. It's not about you making the stakes objectively as high as possible, which inevitably always, in certain genres, always talks about kingdoms falling and worlds ending. It's about how much all of this consequence means to the people that you already know through the characters. It's why the most heavy-hitting characters, villains or heroes, when they make decisions, it's always a really simple decision for a very simple wish that has devastating consequences, that for somebody who does not know the character, they would be like, this person is nuts. Why would they ever think that this would be worth it? But for you as the reader who has gotten to know this character through, say, the author giving you all of this layering of their lives up to this point, you would think, man, that is a really tough choice. I know why they really want to do this. This is not right, but I feel so bad for them. You see the difference here? Even though, say, the world is still ending and everybody will die and that is a terrible thing, what the reader thinks about is not the objective fact of death equals to bad. It's what the character, the story, and the world itself is going through beyond just it ending. What it must be feeling, what these people must be feeling, how it must be like for them. That is depth and complexity. So, in summary, spend time rather than trying to rely on genius. Spend time with your characters, be it a main character or side character. It actually doesn't matter how important the character is. Any depth, any layer, no matter how mundane it is, you add to a character, it gives the character realism, believability, and depth. Spend time with how they've lived their lives. Get to know them as if they are your friend. Without you trying, all this innumerable layering of seemingly simple things would all come together and impact each other in such an intricate and unpredictable manner and create a unique, complex narrative backbone for your story and your characters in a way that no amount of conscious, structured construction would be able to accomplish.